I wrote a article for Jacobin that was about this. It's called Donald Trump being prosecuted for his crimes is good, actually. And in the article, one of the things I point out is like, look, if you or I were involved in a court case about a stolen car and we were caught trying to suborn a witness to like sign a false statement about it, like that would be a big deal. And we'd be facing real consequences, and this seems like the equivalent for trying to essentially deprive millions of people of their right to, a fair election to decide who's president. So I'm pretty sympathetic to prosecuting him for that, especially, right? Like I'm sort of generally sympathetic to prosecuting him for any crimes that he might have committed, but like that one especially. And then yeah, Georgia, I agree. I mean, that's also like in some ways it's kind of the funny. It's the one that took the longest because it seems like so much of this stuff. It's like, again, if you're like there's like a record interview being like, oh yeah, now you need to find me like such and such many votes so you can say that I won the election. That just seems like trying to get people to commit crimes for you, and that seems like the kind of thing that you should be prosecuted for.
Yeah, it's strange to me the arguments.
Rigor on the part of the vote counters now. Just wanted him to look a little harder,
Yeah, no, I do find just arguments against prosecuting just strange, like weird kind of, I don't know, like because it's, I guess, is the main argument that they're worried it's going to create more political instability or something, that it's going to create some kind of witch hunt mentality against like presidents. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, today I was actually listening to the Slate Political Gabfest, that podcast I sometimes listen to, and I remember I think like Emily Bazelon was saying something like about how apparently he hasn't had a mugshot taken for any of these yet. And, I'm kind of with you, Ben, that in general, if someone's done a crime, like they should be treated the same as everyone else. Right. And like, she was kind of saying like, they should have a mugshot. Like why just because he used to be the president, like the whole like American Constitution, obviously once it had all its amendments, right, is premised on like equality before the law. So, I mean, I feel like philosophically, I would want that to be the same for everyone, including him. Oh,
totally. Yeah, I mean, so I wrote something about this for the Daily Beast after the first indictment. I said, like, look, I basically, my view is that if he's pulled over for speeding on his way home in Mar-a-Lago, then like he should get a ticket. And if he doesn't pay his ticket, eventually, right, he should, spend a night in jail like anybody else would, right? That like, argue about whether you should have to spend a night in jail, for unpaid traffic tickets, but like insofar as that's the system for everybody else, that should be the system for him. And same thing with the mugshots. Like I saw, I don't know, somebody reason pointing this out, and it's a fair point, right? Like, look, there is something that's arguably a little objectionable about the whole concept of mugshots. Like you haven't actually been convicted of anything, and there's this embarrassing photo, associated with the crime. But insofar as mugshots are a thing we have for everybody else, absolutely, Trump should have some mugshots.
Yeah. Apparently, he's also been using a fake mugshot, at least according to the political gabfest, to try to get donations. He's been like using some sort of fake mugshot, like in his emails out or something.
That's perfect. That sounds exactly right. Like, I mean, one of the funny things about all this is that, for all the things that I think are good reasons to prosecute Trump, if you were just going to make a utilitarian calculation about like diminishing the threat he poses politically, then you probably wouldn't want any of this to happen because, Republican voters are it makes it really hard for any of the rest of the candidates to like meaningfully run against him because they're all like rallying around him over this.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's get started. I think this is just before where the actual debate starts, but if not, we'll go up a little bit.
Actually have moved in the right direction. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's that. All right, guys. So now let's get into the main event here. Very excited and happy to welcome to the show independent journalist Michael Tracey, where we will be debating the Trump indictments. welcome to independent journalist Michael Tracey. Michael, thank you so much for joining us, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's
our pleasure. Our pleasure. So, all right. So we have a disagreement on the Trump indictments, and I'm curious for you to flesh out your views. Obviously, we'll flesh out our views as well. So let's start with this. So here are the indictments, and then tell me why you think they're BS. So conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. So those are the 4 indictments. What say you?
Yeah. So those are the charges that are contained in the indictment. Just to be technical, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
but, yeah. So first off, I guess I would just stipulate that this indictment should be seen in the context of the broader range of indictment that have been unprecedentedly brought against Trump recently, right? So you had the first indictment in New York State where they somehow concocted a theory that Trump was guilty of defrauding himself. Literally, read that first Alvin Bragg indictment in Manhattan. That's the claim. Trump defrauded himself by misdescribing the reimbursement for payments to Stormy Daniels in his own corporate ledgers. So, okay, that's number one. Number two, you have the Espionage Act being resurrected. Remember, the same statute that was used to charge Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, Daniel Ellsberg, et cetera, that's now being used to go after Trump, the World War I era statute that was used to incredibly overzealously stifle dissent by Woodrow Wilson. Now that's what they're going after Trump with for the classified documents case or the national security documents case. And now here we go with this January 6th case, which is also under the auspices of Jack Smith, who's similarly in charge of the Espionage Act case. And he decided to resurrect the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which doesn't alone make the bringing of the charges unwarranted. I mean, an old statute can still be a relevant statute, but the issue here with this particular charge, conspiracy against rights, is that it's a wholly novel application of this statute specifically tailored to criminalize Trump's conduct. So a hallmark of criminal law, or at least the rational application of criminal law, you would think, is that a violation of a law is foreseeable to a reasonable person, meaning a reasonable person should be able to know or readily intuit or predict that their conduct would be in violation of the law. And that requires that a law not be subject to these creative extrapolations to encompass a vast array of conduct that wouldn't have been initially contemplated as criminalizable under the statute. Okay, so I spoke to one of the defense counsels who's representing a co-conspirator in this indictment, John Eastman, who came up with the cockamamie theory about Pence having the authority to discard electoral votes or count rival slates of electoral votes that have been submitted by Trump electors in the 6 supposedly contested states. And his view is that at 81 years old, this guy is the founder of FIRE, the Civil Liberties Organization, longtime defense attorney who's represented anti-war activists, minority activists over the years. He views this as one of the most ominous infringements on the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights writ large that he's really ever been involved with in his career. Because what are they doing? They're taking what had been previously understood to be political activity and political speech, which you may disagree with, and you may vigorously want to dispute. At the time, I was very much in opposition to a lot of these theories around election fraud that were being propagated by the Trump campaign and right-wing media. And I was, furiously debating with people who were trying to claim that there was some inherent authority of the vice president to unilaterally exercise his own discretion to decide which electoral votes to count. Okay, so I was against that theory. on a political level. But the problem here is now that they've transferred it into the domain of criminal law, which is a fairly stark Rubicon crossing thing to do, because now you're probably going to see, this seems to be ushering in, or could it have the potential to usher in, a new era where rival political factions are now going to be much more incentivized to wield the apparatus of punitive criminal law or punitive criminal state power to basically resolve their political disputes with other factions.
Okay. So can I like?
So just a couple thoughts about the stuff you just said. One is sort of technical about the indictment itself, and the other is like much more general about the thing you ended with. On the indictment itself, I would just note, if you actually take a look at it, it does, so like the New York Times on August 1st published a annotated like version of it. So, you know, it's just like you can see the indictment, and then like it's like a Google Doc with the, you know, annotations turned on, right? Some notes on the side. And on that, so this is the second page of the indictment. There's this paragraph that says, number 3, the defendant has a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election, even to claim falsely there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and he had won. He is also entitled to formally challenge the results of the election through lawful and appropriate means, such as by seeking recounts or audits of the popular vote in states or filing lawsuits challenging ballots and procedures. Indeed, in many cases, the defendant did pursue these methods of contesting the election results. So they said, Charlie Savage's note here says, the indictment acknowledges that Mr. Trump had a First Amendment right to lie about the election, to file lawsuits challenging its results. It seeks to draw a clear line between these kinds of lawful efforts and the unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results to the focus of the criminal case. So, like, in other words, it's fine to give a speech at a rally saying I won the election and they stole it from me. It's fine to file a bunch of nonsense lawsuits that are going to be thrown out by like the judges you appointed. Casey, you know, it's so obvious that how little basis there is for it. That's all fine. It's the stuff that's crossing the line is when you're doing things like, you know, trying to pressure like state officials in states that you lost to submit slates of fake electors to the Electoral College, or trying to get Mike Pence to like somehow declare as vice president during the, you know, the vote counting that this doesn't count. That's the stuff that, you know, that's the stuff that the prosecutors think goes over the line to like, now that's not just like exercising your right to free speech or your right to file whatever lawsuit and get it thrown out that you want to, but like that's the actual conspiring to overturn the results.
Yeah, I've heard that that defense kind of that, and it was notable, I guess, that in the indictment they kind of like anticipate that defense, right? Like this free speech defense, and they're like, no, actually, it doesn't matter if you believed it or not, right? It's like the crime is in the conspiracy, which doesn't require, that kind of has nothing to do with whether you believe something or you're exercising your free speech. So I guess like it's good that that's in the indictment, but you know, in terms of the actual legal theory around this stuff, like I feel like kind of a little bit ill-equipped. I mean, it's interesting that Michael Tracey is just talking about how the laws are old, and like that's kind of one. And I saw someone on the chat say like, you know, that seems to be one of the arguments. But I guess one thing that occurred to me is like, well, a president like committing a crime that's indictable is also super new. So it's just like it's not a common thing. So like it's not like we have precedent of like, oh, in the past when they indicted and arrested a president, you know, they used much newer, more current laws. It's like, well, no, like this is the first time this is happening. So I guess to me it's just like, well, if it fits the law, it doesn't seem like a problem to me that it's old, or it just doesn't seem that relevant. But I've noticed a lot of people, not just Michael Tracey, mention that.
Yeah, so like the National Review did an editorial where they were condemning the indictment, and they made a big deal about this point too, about this being this Reconstruction era law. And in that case, at least, their argument was, not well. I mean, I think by implication, maybe like, oh, look at them like dusting off this thing from Reconstruction, but also, and I guess Michael Tracey said this too, that the sort of novel interpretation thing, and I guess maybe in Tracy's case it might be more consistent. Like, it seemed a little odd to see the National Review making this argument, because normally conservatives make a big deal about being textualists. So that, in other words, all that matters is the text of the law. Like it doesn't, nothing else is important besides what the actual law says. And, because, and the reason I bring that up is like, sure. So this conspiracy against rights statute from Reconstruction, the original thing they were thinking about when they passed that was like the KKK trying to like stop black people from voting and things like that in the South after the Civil War. But, it seems like the question should really be, certainly from that kind of textualist perspective that you would expect the National Review to take, okay, but like, does this fall under the description, right? Like that, this conspiracy against rights description that you're trying to deprive people of a fair election, all that, like, even if it's not the kind of thing that people had in mind when they passed it, like, I think the usual textualist thing would be to say, well, okay, so, if Congress didn't anticipate that, law would have some consequence, but it does, that it's kind of on them to pass a new one to cancel it out, to clarify. They don't want that to happen, right? So that's so all that's the technical point. The more sort of general point that I really wanted to make besides that is that, like, the last thing Tracy says at the end there is, well, this is really going to open up this new era of people, like using the law, right? In political disputes. And look, if people are doing that like frivolously, they don't have a real case. I mean, like, if you're doing some sort of American equivalent of like the Lula prosecution in Brazil or something, okay, that's bad. But I guess what I would argue, and this might just be a sort of much more general sort of ideological disagreement that I have with him, is that that's not really what I'm worried about, right? Like, I think that the thing that I'm much more worried about is presidents never getting in trouble when they break the law. I mean, going all the way back to like the Nixon pardon through Ronald Reagan, like being selling arms to trade for hostages, and like sending arms to the Contras, against the will of Congress, and like planes that seem to be doing other things when they're on their way back to the U.S. and never seeing the inside of a courtroom about it. To Obama saying he was going to look forward, not backward, and not prosecute anybody for involvement in the Bush torture program. Like, all that stuff bugs me way more than like the possible. I'm much more worried about the legal system being underused against presidents who break the law than it being overused.
Yeah, totally.
All right. If nobody else has anything, we will go back.
Yeah, I'm eager to see their rebuttal.
Yeah.
Like, can I interject here, and then you can respond? I want to respond to some of your things, and then you can respond to what I say. So let's start with the idea, the notion that this is like about free speech. If Donald Trump had just done 25, 50, 100 rallies downplaying the results of the election, saying he won even though he didn't, and all that stuff, and he never did the fake electors slates, he never did tried to force the DOJ to send letters to the different states demanding that they, don't certify Biden and do the alternate slate of electors. If he never took those other actions, do you think he would have been charged?
Impossible to say. All I could do is read what the indictment actually contains as allegations of what constitutes this supposed criminal conspiracy that Trump is guilty of conducting.
Yeah, because I don't think there's any way he would have been charged if it was just the rallies and he just did his speech. I think once you got to the fake elector slates, that became the real criminal issue. And to respond to some of your other points there, I know you brought up a free speech expert who says he's concerned by this, but there's also like
not just an expert, a defense counsel,
for one of the alleged
co-conspirators.
No, I got you. But I'm saying there's also many free speech experts who think that Citizens United is about political speech, and I totally disagree with that. I think it's about political corruption. And there's also experts on the other side of this, like Bradley Moss. So it's not particularly persuasive to me. I find that just like an appeal to authority. To the idea that this is unprecedented and a novel application, I mean, I would argue.
Okay, calling balls and strikes here. That's not what appeal to authority means. That's this is. I was actually just like after this is over, I'm going to finish grading like final exams and turn in grades for this logic, reasoning, and persuasion class. Been teaching online over the summer for Rutgers, and this is a thing you always have to spend time on in classes like that. That the like the appeal to authority fallacy doesn't just mean like citing expert opinion. That's fine, right? Like it has to be irrelevant opinion, and it's a perfectly reasonable counter argument to say, okay, but like actually expert opinion is divided. That's fine, but like this is just me being neurotic and not letting see that phrase go by without correcting it.
No, yeah, I mean, like I do think like generally like a good way to like determine when is it like an actual reasonable appeal to authority versus an unreasonable one is like, okay, one, did you just show that like one expert said the thing? Or did you show that there's like a consensus around it? Because like the first, if you just say like, oh, this one guy who has authority said this, it's like, that's not going to be particularly persuasive because there are going to be experts on the other side. And then like, are the authorities even relevant in the first place? I mean, it seems like this guy's irrelevant, but yeah, I mean, even then, like, if it's just one guy and you don't have any like, oh, a poll says like 90% of free speech experts think that this shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Then it probably doesn't mean that much.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that like, the appeal to authority fallacy is committed when, it's the flip side of like, ad hominem, right? Which is the other one people always mess up. They think it means like saying something mean. That like ad hominem is when you're treating an irrelevant negative as a reason to think that the person is wrong, and appeal to authority as a fallacy is you're treating an irrelevant positive essentially as a reason to think that they're right. And yeah, I think on that ground, right? So that's like the second of your two tests just now, right? Like that, like this is what Tracy's saying is fine. I think that on the first one, I think Kyle's got a reasonable point in response, which is like, okay, it's okay to cite expert opinion. That's not an appeal. That's not the appeal to authority fallacy in itself, but whether it's like a persuasive citation of expert opinion, I agree with you. Like it's, the question is whether, okay, but is it just like, sure, one expert says this, that's fine. But like, is there actually a consensus of experts? Because what makes appealing to expert opinion legitimate and not the appeal to authority fallacy is that, there's a epistemic division of labor. We can't all be experts on everything. So some of us will be experts on one thing and report back to the others and whatever. And it's legitimate. Like it has real evidential value because the experts have looked into it more and they know stuff that you don't. But then like, if it's, if expert opinion is really divided, then that doesn't tell you anything. And certainly just like, here's this guy I talked to who has this concern by itself doesn't, that's not good enough to say like, okay, we should really think twice about saying that something illegitimate is, like that this is a legitimate use of the law. Cause like, look, all the free speech experts think this is a problem like this. Yeah. I mean, that's, you can find, I'm sure, like, especially like, yeah, I'm sure you can find, like a civil libertarian expert who says anything about this, right? I mean, like just because, like Victor says, I mean, this is a pretty novel situation. All right.
almost anything we would do legally vis-a-vis what happened is going to be novel and unprecedented because we've never been here before. And the charge of conspiracy against rights, to me, I look at that and I say the reason why they did that charge is because it was an attempt to disenfranchise millions of voters if their scheme had succeeded.
Okay, so I'm not trying to appeal to authority. I'm just giving you an example of another person who's making an argument on the basis of free speech without being a Trump partisan. I mean, this guy happens to not even like Trump.
And we know you're not a Trump sycophant as well.
I understand the point.
I'm just
saying there's experts on the other side of this
on either side of this. So there are people with fancy pedigrees that would say all kinds of things. That doesn't necessarily make them correct.
No, I'm not saying his pedigree makes him correct. I was just citing another example of someone making a similar case. But so you propose a hypothetical of, what if Trump had only done such and such and not this, but charges have been brought? I mean, that's impossible to say. It's a counterfactual. What we can do is look at the actual text of the indictment, and what it does is it.
All right, I just thought this might be a fun place to stop because he's appealing to a much more general principle here, and I just thought it'd be fun to let everybody sound off on it. Are we just like, are all counterfactual mysterious? Like, can we say that like some counterfactual claims seem true and some seem false?
Yeah, it's like, it's such a weird, like, we're just total skeptic. I'm like, oh man, good thing I didn't drop that glass on my way upstairs or it would have broken. And Michael Tracey's like, hold on, okay, we don't know, how can you really say? Like, I don't know. I mean, it's just a weird position to take, like this total skepticism about all counterfactuals because they're not actual,
It's like his way of being a contrarian. It's like adopting this radical skepticism and it like lets him hold these contrarian opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of funny, honestly, because the first time I did a sort of debate or discussion with Michael Tracey was about an article that he and Angela Nagel wrote. This is like, I don't know, late 2020 probably, or not even that late. It was after the primaries were over, but it was about like all the things that Bernie Sanders had done wrong, and the implication certainly seemed to be that like he might have won if he hadn't done some of these things wrong, which seems to suggest that there are at least some counterfactual we know are true. Like it just I don't want to harp on this too much, but I mean this is just one of these weird things that people in the sort of context of punditry will say about reasoning that like drive me crazy. It's like, you can't prove a negative and things like that. It's like, it's like just sort of treating it's like, oh, it's a counterfactual. Okay, never mind then. Like there's nothing to explore. Have an argument about it,
Yeah. And it's like, I also thought his remark was kind of weird about like, I wasn't like saying that me invoking this expert has like any value to the conversation. I just happened to be bringing up the fact that there exists another guy who thinks what I think. Like, I mean, clearly there's like an implication there that's supposed to carry some evidential weight, I think. But
yeah, I mean, definitely, because he wouldn't just, because like otherwise he would just say like, especially because he's not being like, oh yeah, well this is what I think, and also, I don't even know who'd be good for this. And also, like Matt Taibbi said it or whatever, right? Like it's not. I don't know if Taibbi did say it, like, but it's like so, like I don't think he would say that, right? And like treat it the way that he treated this. Like I think he was like treating this as, and you should really listen because this guy knows what he's talking about.
Posits that a litany of Trump's political speech is being characterized as constituent elements of this overarching felonious conspiracy. So there's a reason why they list a whole bunch of Trump's tweets where he's criticizing state legislators, or he's attacking the Secretary of State of Georgia, or he's making all kinds of other, again, I think mostly harebrained comments about the lack of veracity of the election results. There's a reason why all that is cited by Jack Smith in this indictment as a component of the overarching conspiracy, because That's what he's saying is a part of the conspiracy, the speech. Now, is it the only element of the alleged conspiracy? No, there are other elements that are being posited. But the point is that he had to weave together this vast range of, this vast constellation of political conduct and put it under the umbrella of now a felony conspiracy. So
I know it just stopped, so just real briefly, I don't want to sound off on this in a way that suggests that I know more about this than I do, because there's a, there's a legal question here that, that none of us are experts on, and we shouldn't pretend to be, but I mean, I think it's pretty normal to sort of, in the context of talking about conspiring to do something that's against the law, to bring up things that wouldn't in themselves be against the law as like part of like a larger factual claim, right? That it's like that the things that like establish what your intentions are, what you're trying to do or whatever, that's like, you're still, I think just the fact that it's brought up in the indictment, I would be very reluctant to say that shows that they're really kind of sort of criminalizing him saying those things, as opposed to just like they were being brought up as evidence that, for like what his intentions were, or what he was trying to do. Totally.
I mean, it strikes me as, like, again, obviously not a legal expert, but it did strike me as pretty normal what he's describing. And it's just funny the way he talks about it, and almost with like a nefarious tone. He's like, oh my God, they're building all this like big conspiracy case. And I'm like, yeah, that's what fucking DAs do. They build cases. Like, I don't understand what the problem is. Like, they're looking for things that speak to motive, that speak to intent. And it just seems like really normal. And like part of that story is going to be a series of things that in themselves are not illegal, right? But then just like build up a case to point to why the act that is actually illegal happened. So like, I don't know. It just, it strikes me as a weird like reason to be skeptical.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a few things there. I think the fact that you emphasize one component is, itself important, because you acknowledge it's not the entirety of the indictment or what he's being charged for. I do think that, a person who allegedly committed crimes, talking about those alleged crimes is probably pretty relevant to, a jury in terms of figuring out whether or not they believe Trump is guilty on these. And I would also say, so in terms of my view, I think there are three pieces here that make the indictment, pretty solid and make it so that I support it. Because if we were in a situation where Trump had just given rallies and said all kinds of like nonsense, I would not support that indictment against him. I would think that that was a violation of free speech rights. So to me, there are three key components that makes this legitimate. Number one is the fact that there was no significant amount of fraud. Number two is the fact that a reasonable person presented with all of the information that Trump was presented with would understand that there was no real fraud. And number three, that in spite of those things, you still concoct this elaborate multi-state scheme to try to, in effect, steal an election. So you said previously, that you didn't think any reasonable person would really expect that this was criminal behavior. They would think that this was just political behavior or political speech. I just really disagree with that. And in fact, you have people who were cajoled into being fake electors under false pretenses precisely because of the reason that they would understand that there was something wrong with what they were doing if they really understood what was going on. If I was personally, concocting this like elaborate multi-state scheme involving some cockamamie legal theory on January 6th to try to steal an election, I would 100% understand that there was potentially something criminal about that. And, people like Bill Barr and others also, viewed it as likely criminal activity. So I just also disagree with the idea that this is totally wild and no one would have seen this as a problem or criminal behavior before.
Well, Bill Barr, despite having fallen out with Trump, as you know, still has prefaced his comments on this January 6th indictment by saying that there's a potential danger in criminalizing political activity, but you're right. He nonetheless thinks that the charges could be seen as legitimate.
That's legit.
So
yeah.
on the question of the lack of fraud or a reasonable person not being able to conclude that there was actually significant fraud in the election, that's a matter of political contestation, or had been. Like, you could make an argument that there is no fraud of any significant import, and I would probably make the same argument, but then somebody else could make a countervailing argument, and then the idea, at least prior to August of 2023, is that that will be resolved in the realm of political disputation rather than by a prosecutor indicting your debate opponent with
Jack Smith.
But again, he's not being indicted because he, lied about the fraud, or because he believed about him or didn't believe him or whatever. He's indicted because there was no real fraud. He was presented with all sorts of information to indicate that there was no real fraud. He gave some indications privately that he knew some of these claims were, quote, crazy, at least when it came to Sidney Powell, and yet went ahead with these fake slates of electors and trying to overturn the results anyway. So it's those three pieces that you need. And if you didn't have one of those pieces, then you're right. It becomes difficult. And listen, they're going to have to, at trial, they're going to have to prove what he heard and what he knew and what he really thought about these claims, et cetera, is going to be a component piece. But without all three of those pieces, then, I think that this would fall apart. But if you don't have those three pieces, like, examples of, resistance, liberal, whoever, saying the Electoral College should do whatever last time around, sure, they, were saying things that were kind of wild, but they didn't create some like fake elector scheme to also back it up with knowledge that what they were saying was completely false.
And I think
so. I think that's actually I think that's actually a slightly wrong way to set this up, right? Because I think that whereas like what he knew or whatever might go to the question of whether he was like knowingly breaking the law for some of this, although also usually sincere belief that you're not breaking the law doesn't make it okay to break the law. That's not usually how laws work. But in any case, but it's really, like the third component is really the whole thing, right? Like that it's not that it's fine, yes, of course, like just saying like, you can make false factual claims. Like that's outside of like very restricted exceptions, right? Like that's fine. It better be, right? Because like all political debates to a certain extent are going to involve disputes about what the empirical facts are. But what you can't generally do is like try to, is to try to like get people to do things that that are clearly against the law. Like that that saying like, okay, and by the way, I saw somebody in the chat bringing up, and I guess Tracy kind of did too, but this in 2016. There was this really embarrassing, cringy thing that a bunch of liberals did that like mostly has been memory hold since then, and it's perfectly fair to bring it up, which is that there was this attempt to like get electors to not to like in states that Trump had won to not vote for Trump in the Electoral College. It was called the Hamilton Electors, and it's a weird, embarrassing thing. Insofar as there might have been some states where that would have actually been against the law, I actually have no problem with prosecuting people who did that. Unfortunately, not every state had, like, there are some states that have laws against what are called faithless electors, which are if you're one of your state's electors and you don't vote for the guy, who you're an elector for, right? That you can be, theoretically be prosecuted for that. Basically, nobody ever is. But like, yeah, if you're one of those states, then sure. And by the way, every state should be like that. It's crazy that there are states where that's not against the law. But also, what Trump is accused of doing is is worse than that. I mean, if you're like actually trying to get states to not to like send some fake slate of electors other than the ones that were actually chosen in the election, like that's like I'd be fine even with prosecuting the first thing, honestly, but like the second thing is also just objectively much worse.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think some of those like laws against faithless electors might have been passed in response to like what happened in 2016, like in some of those states. And yeah, I agree that seems like a good thing. And I will just say, like, as a Canadian, I just find this whole electoral college thing just mind-bogglingly strange in the first place. Like, why do you have this layer between like the direct vote of the president or for president but that's obviously a whole other conversation.
That is obviously horrendously crazy and anti-democratic. I mean, Donald Trump and George W. Bush the first time both became president despite losing the popular vote. Like uncontroversially losing the popular vote, so like, yeah, that's awful that exists at all. There should absolutely be laws against faithless electors. I mean, like the only circumstance under which I would like actually be sympathetic to somebody doing that is if they were like, no, this guy lost the popular vote. That's the so I don't care. I'm not going to like let him like have this weird technicality victory, but yeah, we're still clearly better off having laws against faithless electors, but it is a layer worse. So having an electoral college is terrible.
Totally. I mean, it's just weird. It's just an extra layer too that is another thing that could become corrupted, which in itself is like bad. You want to like minimize things that could be corrupted and like be less democratic.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's one of the big reasons. Like structurally, it's one of the big reasons that it's almost impossible to have an electorally viable third party in the U.S. That because like nobody would really worry that like if you just had like a national popular vote, like it's not there are like states where the state might be swung by a few hundred votes here or there, and you might actually worry about being part of that effect, but nobody's really going to worry that like it's like, oh my God, if I'm one of the 10,000 people who vote for Jill Stein, that's going to make a difference in an election where 110 million people are voted.
I was also going to say, just in the chat, point taken, I can see someone said something. Yeah, instead of having a electoral college, it's way more rational to just have a king. Like in Canada.
Yeah, who can dissolve parliament and call a new election? That's
yeah, cool. Exactly. The one other thing I was going to say though about like the necessary conditions for crime is I have heard a lot of people say that a lot of the January 6th protesters, or whatever you want to call them, sedition, like they tried to defend themselves on the grounds that they like sincerely believed, right, that the election was stolen or something like that, and so like in a way, like what's good about that is that like that has been tested very recently.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.